The day my daughter called me from her mother's driveway, crying so hard she could barely get the words out, I was sitting on my back porch in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the sun go down over the Blue Ridge Mountains with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten back from my weekly walk with my neighbor, and I was still a little winded. 63 years old, and my knees remind me every single day. I let the phone ring twice before I answered, not because I didn't want to talk to her, because I needed those 2 seconds to decide what kind of father I was going to be in that moment. I knew what had happened before she said a word. Let me back up about 4 years, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My name is not important. What's important is that I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for a mid-size infrastructure firm out of Charlotte. Roads, bridges, drainage systems, the kind of work nobody thinks about until a bridge doesn't collapse and they go home safe to their families. I was good at it, not flashy. Good, I made a decent living. We had a 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Mooresville, a vegetable garden in the backyard that my wife had planted the year we moved in, and 2 kids who grew up knowing what it meant when Dad said, "We don't spend what we don't have." My wife. I'll call her my ex-wife now. They're saying that still feels strange after 30 years. Her name was Patrice, and for most of those 30 years, I thought we were happy. Maybe we were. Maybe she just wanted something I didn't know how to give. The first sign I missed was when she started talking about her co-worker, a man I'll call Warren. The way people talk about someone they've already decided is impressive. He ran a commercial real estate investment group. He drove a Mercedes. He flew to Miami for the weekend the way I drove to the grocery store. She mentioned him casually, the way you mentioned the weather. And I, being who I am, didn't read into it. I should have. The second sign was when she started criticizing things that had never bothered her before. My car, a 2009 Ford F-150 with 140,000 miles on it, ran perfectly fine. My clothes, I wore what I needed to wear. My habits, I tracked our budget in a spreadsheet every Sunday night. Had since we first got married and were living paycheck to paycheck in a 1-bedroom apartment. She used to sit next to me and go through it with me. Now she rolled her eyes and left the room. The third sign was when she stopped coming to bed at the same time as me. I could tell you about all the conversations, the counseling sessions we tried for about 6 weeks before she said it wasn't helping. The night she finally sat me down at the kitchen table and told me she wasn't happy and hadn't been for a long time. I could tell you about all of that, but the part that mattered, the part that changed everything, was what my daughter said the morning after. She was 26 at the time. She came over while I was sitting at that same kitchen table, drinking coffee, staring at nothing. She sat down across from me, and I thought she was going to say she was sorry. Instead, she said, "Dad, I think you have to be honest with yourself. Warren is successful in a way that matters to Mum. He can give her things you never could." I looked at my daughter. My daughter who I had coached in soccer for 4 years, whose college applications I had stayed up past midnight helping edit, whose first car I had co-signed for when she was 22 and just starting out. I didn't say anything. I just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, sweetheart, I hear you." She patted my hand and left. I sat there for a long time after that. The divorce was finalized 13 months later. The house in Mooresville went to Patrice. Her attorney argued she had contributed more to the household and that I had underinvested in the marriage. I didn't fight hard enough. Looking back, I think part of me believed it. When people tell you something long enough, even people you love, you start to absorb it like water into wood. I took my half of the retirement accounts, my truck, and a storage unit worth of furniture. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Asheville because I'd always liked it there, and because it was far enough from Mooresville that I wouldn't accidentally drive past the house. My son, who lives in Denver and has always been more quietly observant than his sister, called me the week I moved in. He said, "Dad, are you doing okay?" And I mean actually okay, not the answer you give to make people stop asking. I laughed for the first time in weeks. I told him I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. He said that was good enough. My daughter, meanwhile, had moved quickly into the role of Warren's biggest advocate. She helped her mother plan the new decor for the house. Warren had moved in within 6 weeks of the divorce being finalized. She posted photos of their family dinners on Instagram. She called him a real provider. I know because a mutual family friend told me, not because I was looking. I stopped looking at things that would hurt me. That was the first thing I changed. The second thing I changed was my mornings. I started walking every day at 6:30, 2 miles, then 3, then eventually 5. My knees complained, but they adjusted. I started cooking real food instead of ordering delivery every night. I found a bluegrass jam session at a local venue on Thursday evenings. I played guitar since college and had barely touched the instrument in 20 years. I started going. I wasn't performing some kind of recovery montage. I was just remembering who I was before I spent 3 decades trying to be someone's idea of enough. About 8 months after the divorce, Patrice and Warren got engaged. My daughter called to tell me as if it were news I needed to process carefully. She said, "I hope you can be mature about this, Dad." I told her I hoped they were happy. I meant it, mostly. Whatever complicated feelings I had about Patrice, I genuinely did not wish her a miserable second marriage. That's not who I am. The wedding was set for the following spring. My daughter was the maid of honor. She called me 2 weeks before to inform me, not ask, inform, that my son would also be attending as a family representative, and that it would be easier for everyone if I simply didn't come. I hadn't been invited. I wasn't planning to go, but the way she said it, like she was managing a logistical problem, that stung in a specific way. My son went to the wedding. He texted me from the parking lot before he went in. He said, "I want you to know I'm only here because Maya is my sister and I love her, not because of anything else." I texted back, "I know, bud, go in. Be good to your sister. He's a good kid. Man." He's 31. I should stop calling him a kid. I didn't hear much for almost a year after the wedding. My daughter and I spoke occasionally. Birthdays, holidays, surface-level calls where we talked about weather and her job, and carefully avoided everything real. I had made peace with the distance, not happily but practically. Some relationships go through ice and come out thinner. What I didn't expect was what happened in the spring of the following year. Warren's commercial real estate investments had apparently been leveraged in ways that weren't sustainable. I found this out not from Patrice or my daughter, but from a buddy of mine who works in commercial lending in Charlotte. He mentioned it casually, the way people mention things they assume you already know. "Heard your ex-wife's husband is in some trouble with his portfolio." Few of those mixed-use developments downtown got underwater fast after the interest rate hikes. I said I hadn't heard that. He said, "Yeah, it's been going around. Not great." I thanked him for the coffee and drove home and sat in my apartment for a while. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing. I did feel something, but it wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like the quiet exhale you let out when a storm you've been watching on the horizon finally makes landfall somewhere else. I didn't call anyone. I didn't say anything to my son. I just watched. Over the next several months, I heard things through the same channels that small interconnected communities always use: neutral friends, professional contacts, the occasional slip from my daughter when she was stressed and talking without filtering. Warren had taken on 3 major commercial development projects in the Charlotte metro area right before the Federal Reserve started its aggressive rate hiking cycle in 2022 and 2023. The financing on those projects was variable rate. When the rates climbed, the debt service climbed with it. 2 of the projects stalled mid-construction. 1 went into foreclosure. The house in Mooresville, my house, the one I had paid the down payment on, the one where I had retiled the bathroom myself over a long weekend in 2011, got caught up in it. Warren had apparently refinanced it to pull out equity for the business. That equity was now gone. My daughter called me on a Thursday evening. I was at my bluegrass jam. I felt the phone buzz in my pocket, saw her name, and decided to call her back after. We finished our set. We were working on a version of Wagon Wheel that I had always thought was overdone, but the group loved, and I sat in my truck in the parking lot and called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Dad." Her voice was different, not the managed, careful voice she had been using with me for 2 years. Raw. "Dad, things have gotten really bad." I said, "Tell me." She told me. All of it, or most of it. The foreclosure notice. The meeting with the bankruptcy attorney. The fact that she and her husband, she had married a man named, let's say her husband, had been helping Patrice and Warren financially for the last 4 months and were now stretched too thin themselves. She told me that Patrice had called my son in Denver, asking if he could contribute. She told me that they were looking at having to move out of the Mooresville house within 60 days. When she finished, there was a long silence. I said, "I'm sorry that's happening. That sounds really hard." She said, "Dad, we need help." And there it was. The thing I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. Not because I wanted to watch them suffer, but because I needed to know, when it came, what I was going to do. What kind of man I was. I said, "Maya." First time I had used her name in a while. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." She said, "Okay." I said, 2 years ago, you sat across from me at my kitchen table the morning after your mother told me she wanted a divorce, and you told me that Warren could give her things I never could. Do you remember that?" Long silence. Then, "Dad, I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking if you remember." She said she remembered. I said, "I don't have enough money to fix what's happening to your mother's financial situation. That's not me being cruel. That's just math. Warren made decisions with leverage that I would never have made, and those decisions have consequences that I am not in a position to absorb. What I can do is this. If you need a place to stay while you figure out your next steps, my guest room is yours. You and your husband, both, for as long as you need it." She started crying. I sat in that truck in the parking lot for another 20 minutes after we hung up. Patrice called me herself 3 days later. I hadn't spoken to her directly in almost 18 months. Her voice was composed, the way it gets when she's holding herself together through sheer stubbornness. She said she wanted to be dignified about this. I respected that. She said she wasn't calling to ask me for money. She said she was calling because she thought I deserved to hear from her directly that she was sorry for some of the things that had happened. Not the divorce itself. She still believed that was the right decision for her, and I think she was probably right. But for the way certain conversations had gone, for some things that were said. I told her I appreciated that, and I did. She asked how I was doing. I told her about Asheville, about the walks and the guitar. She laughed a little and said, "You always did play well." I had forgotten she used to say that. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. It wasn't warm exactly, but it was decent. Two people who had shared 30 years being decent to each other on a phone call. That felt like something. My daughter and her husband stayed with me for 6 weeks. It was awkward for the first few days. The guest room is small, my apartment isn't built for 3 people, and we were all navigating something we didn't have a script for. But something happened around the end of the first week that I didn't expect. She started asking me about the budget spreadsheet. She had seen me pulling it up on my laptop on a Sunday evening, the same way I had done every Sunday evening for 40 years. She sat down next to me, exactly the way her mother used to back in the beginning, and said, "Can you show me how you do that?" I showed her. We sat there for 2 hours. I showed her how I categorized everything, how I tracked fixed versus variable expenses, how I built in a buffer for irregular costs, how I thought about the difference between an asset that appreciates and a liability that feels like an asset. She asked good questions. Her husband joined us after a while. He asked good questions too. At the end of it, she said, "I never understood why you kept track of everything so carefully. Mom used to say it meant you didn't trust her." I said it didn't have anything to do with trust. It had to do with not wanting to be caught by surprise. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You weren't caught by surprise, were you? With any of this?" I thought about that for a second. Then I said, "No, not really." She nodded slowly. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I said things to you that I shouldn't have said. I put my hand over hers the way she had put her hand over mine at that kitchen table 2 years ago. I said, I know, and I know you believed them when you said them. That's what made them hard. She cried a little. I let her. My son flew in from Denver that weekend. I hadn't asked him to. He just came. He took the couch without complaint, the way he has always moved through difficulty, which is quietly and without making it about himself. The 4 of us had dinner together that Saturday night. I made a beef stew that I'd been perfecting for about 2 years, something I'd started cooking after I moved to Asheville, and realized I actually liked cooking when there was no one to tell me I was doing it wrong. It was a good night, imperfect, and a little cramped, and genuinely good. At some point after dinner, my son came and stood next to me at the kitchen sink while I was doing dishes. He said, without looking at me, "You handled all of this really well, Dad." I handed him a bowl to dry. I said, "I'm still figuring it out." He said, "Yeah, but you're figuring it out in Asheville with a guitar and a good stew recipe. That's not nothing." I laughed. I said, "No, that's not nothing. My daughter and her husband found an apartment in Asheville about 20 minutes from me. Her husband had been able to do his work remotely, and she found a position with a healthcare company based here. They moved in on a Saturday in October. I helped them carry boxes. My knees complained the whole time. Patrice eventually sold what remained of the Mooresville assets and moved into a smaller place in Concord, about 30 minutes from Charlotte. She's doing okay, I think. We exchange text occasionally. Nothing heavy, just enough to remain 2 people who once loved each other and are now trying to remain decent about it. Warren is gone from the picture entirely. That's all I know. And all I need to know. The house in Mooresville sold to a young couple who, I heard through someone who still lives in the neighborhood, have a toddler and a golden retriever, and have already started planting things in the backyard garden. The garden Patrice planted the year we moved in. I don't know why that made me feel okay, but it did. I still walk every morning at 6:30. 5 miles, regardless of weather, though I'll admit the mornings when I can see the mist settling into the valleys below the ridge are the ones I look forward to most. My knees have stopped complaining as much. My guitar playing has gotten genuinely better. The Thursday group asked me last month if I wanted to take a short solo feature on a song we've been working up, and I said yes, and I only fumbled the chord change once. My daughter and I have dinner most Sunday evenings now. She brings wine. Sometimes her husband comes. Sometimes it's just us. Last month she helped me reorganize my filing system for the apartment. She's apparently become, in her own words, weirdly into personal finance. And we stayed up until 11 going through old documents and talking about nothing important. It reminded me of something, though I couldn't have told you exactly what. I have not started dating. I'm not in a hurry. 63-year-old divorced men in Asheville apparently have more options than I would have expected, according to a few friends who have opinions about this. But I'm not looking for options right now. I'm looking at the mountains in the morning. I'm eating the soup I made. I'm playing the chord changes until they're clean. Someone asked me recently if I felt like I had won something. Like everything that happened, the divorce, the remarriage, the collapse of Warren's empire, the reconciliation with my daughter, had resolved itself into some kind of victory. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said, I don't think of it as winning. I think of it as arriving. I spent a long time trying to be what someone else needed me to be, and when that failed, I had to figure out who I actually was. That turns out to take a while. It turns out to be worth it. My daughter called while I was writing this down. She wanted to know if I had a good cast iron skillet she could borrow. I told her I had 2. She could take her pick. She said, "You really do have everything figured out, don't you, Dad?" I said, "Not even close," but I laughed when I said it. And that, I think, is the difference.